Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for episode 200?
I am the mother, and I am the child. I am here, the golden bowl. I am the dot that the ewelets fly. 3 pure rays, the pillars of life. I am the wren, the king of birds. I am bard and teller of lies. I am a song within the heart. I am a light that will never die. I am stars within the void. I am the mother, and I am the child. I am here, the golden bowl. I am the dot that the ewelets fly. 3 pure rays, the pillars of life. I am the wren, the king of birds. I am bard and teller of lies. I am a song am stars within the void. I am the eye of the Aeon.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to DruidCast episode 200. I am your host, Dave the Bard, and DruidCast is brought to you on or around the 20th of the month by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. If you want to find out more about the Order and our courses, you can do that at our website, which is at druidry.org. Opening the show, you heard The Mabon by Silver on the Tree, and I'm delighted to be able to play that because Tim, the guitarist of Silver on the Tree, has just remastered the first two Silver on the Tree albums, The Eye of the Aeon and The Mystic Spiral, and both are now available to download, and a link to those downloads will be in our show notes. Well, I have put together a show for you, a journey through 199 episodes of DruidCast. I can't believe it's been so long. We started in June 2007 and we've now reached our 200th episode. I remember walking into Philip's room and saying, there's this new technology available called podcasts and I think we should put one out. And he just looked at me as if to say, okay, Dave, okay, another crazy idea, but off you go. And I said, I want to do it monthly. And he said, oh, monthly's a bit much. But I went downstairs and I started to put together the first episode. And the first thing you are going to hear is the very first words spoken on DruidCast number 1. And that is going to go into a journey through 4 academic talks. These are only clips, but there'll be 4 academic talks. The first one is Professor Ronald Hutton from episode 4, where he was at an Obod camp talking about the pagan horned god. Episode 34 then is Brian Bates talking about his book The Way of Weird. Episode 155 takes us to Professor Roland Rotherham talking about King Arthur, and then episode 6 is Philip Cargom talking about his memories of working with the founder of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, Ross Nichols, also known as Newin. So, it's a little longer, this show. I think it'll be about an hour and a half, but I think you're going to enjoy this journey. So, grab that cuppa and let's go. Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. I'm your host, Dave the Bard, and over the coming months we'll be talking about topics of interest to modern Druids, seasonal thoughts, discussions on the Arwen and mythology, sacred sites, that kind of thing. And we'd also like to feature the work of bards out there. So if you're a poet, a storyteller or a musician, do send in your work for our Bardic Circle feature that will start next month, and I'll tell you how to do that at the end of the show. But as this is the first show, I thought it would be best to begin with a short history of the Order and how it's run, that kind of thing, a bit about what we do.
I want to do a couple of things. Mostly I'm going to entertain you by talking about why the horned god came to be the focus for Godhead in most forms of modern paganism. And the other is to ask about and discuss the way in which people relate to the horned god or other forms of god at the present day as druids and pagans and both. First, how we got a horned god in the first place is actually not that obvious, because when you look at the ancient world, there are lots and lots of horned gods and some horned goddesses around, but they're less common than the unhorned variety. And nature, on the whole, is not what ancient pagans venerate or worship, because there's too much of it, and it's too dangerous most of the time. When you look at the most popular deities, goddesses and gods, whether you value them by literature about them, by inscriptions people have left to them, by shrines and temples and dedications made to them, they not only lack horns, but they're deities of civilization. They're looking after the human world and what human beings are trying to do. And this remains the focus after ancient paganism dies away or is destroyed, and the Christian centuries bring on the images of the ancient pagan world by turning them to literary figures, artistic figures, and allegories. If you look at a top 4 of favourite gods through the Middle Ages, and then down to round about 1800, favourite pagan gods who still appear in art and literature and sculpture, The top favourite's Jupiter, or Zeus, because he's the big cheese, he leads the pagan family, but also he's quite similar to Jehovah. He chucks thunderbolts about, he bosses people about, but also he stands for responsibility, management, having to look after things if you happen to be thrust into the position of having to take care of a situation. Second is Neptune. All the world loves a sailor, and the world depends on trade and on the oceans, and they're very dangerous places. So Neptune is a top favourite to protect those who are sailing. Third is Mercury, as god of education, communication, trade, relating to people, getting on with each other. And finally there's Vulcan, or Hephaestus, the god of industry. Anybody who engages in industry of any kind venerates that god, at least imaginatively, within a Christian theology and universe. So those are the favourites, and nothing changes from about 500 to about 1800. And then things change decisively. The gods I've named almost disappear from poetry, from sculpture, and from art. And the focus changes instead to a horned god of nature. You don't hear horned gods mentioned at all in English poetry, not once, between the end of the Middle Ages and the year 1800. After 1800, the references to the horned god multiply so fast in English poetry that he becomes the most written about god in the whole of English literature, just because of what happens after 1800. So what has changed? The answer is one enormous thing which the English invent and inflict on the world, and then spreads out across England and from it. It's the Industrial Revolution. And it affects one amazing change. And for once I can put it in a statistic. You can't always do this in history. In fact, it's very rare. But I can actually do it simply with this. In the year 1800, 80% of the English live in villages and hamlets and farms in the countryside, and their living is based on working the land, on agriculture and herding. 1900, 80% of the English live in towns or cities, and their living is based on commerce or industry. They've been cut off from the land as a nation in 100 years. And by the time you reach the mid-19th century, the cities are spreading so fast in England, it actually seems possible that every green bit of the land will disappear in another 100 years, leaving one vast concreted over, stone and brick built, smoking mess from one side of the island to the other. And that's why this tremendous emotional reaction takes place, on which we are still riding in this camp today. And it begins with something that we call the Romantic movement, which was a realization, a shock realization, that for the first time, the European human race might be suffering from too much civilization. And it's a revolution in perception. Suddenly, things that had been feared or had been despised for hundreds of years became admired and loved for the first time. For the first time, European human beings began to value wild nature over farmland, began to value magic over religion, began to value the night, moonlight and starlight over the day, began to value the feminine over the masculine. Now, the biggest entity to gain from this was the goddess. Suddenly, the popular goddesses...
And finally, I found a reference to a book which was, at that point, in the British Museum. It's now in the British Library, which was an Old English healing manual, now called Lachnanga, means sort of healing. Yeah. And so I went up and got permission to see that in the British Museum, and to put on cotton gloves, and so I wouldn't affect the pages of this 1,000-year-old manuscript. And it was extremely moving to me to find this manuscript, because it felt like a kind of a message that had been hidden all these years, waiting for us to rediscover. Actually, the book itself is a book of it looks like at first fairly straightforward medical herbal remedies, but with sections of it that are much more complex, stories and rituals and so on. And those are what drew me, and that's how I came up with the discovery of weird, is through this ancient manuscript written by probably a Christian monk, because they were the ones who did the actual writing in those days, because we were on this island an oral culture back then. So the Christian missionaries who came in to modernize us, they were the ones who wrote that. So I think probably the historians reckon it was maybe not a full-fledged monk, but a scribe who wrote down the healing remedies and some of the secrets.
Bless them for doing that, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know.
Well, I think it was probably quite a brave thing to do, too. I'm not sure whether it was done. I mean, it could have been done as a sort of writing exercise, but I doubt it, because a lot of it was the kind of approach to spiritual experience that was to which the church had quite a lot of antipathy, because it wasn't going through the priests. So I like to think this manuscript was written by a small, 2 or 3 renegade scribes, who knew that one day we'd be talking like this on a podcast and talking about these ideas, and just wanted to hide them for us.
Yeah, have you read the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell? They're Arthurian novels.
Yes.
And basically the scribe is a Christian scribe who is writing down the life of the pagan Arthur in a monastery in Saxon, because, do you remember it? I don't know if you do or not, but I can almost imagine a similar thing happening with this manuscript,
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. How's the story coming along of Christ, brother, blah, blah. Oh, it's coming along very well, but there seem to be an awful lot of herb names in here. Oh, well, he liked herbs, so, that kind of...
Well, exactly, because to write it down, you had to make friends with someone who could write. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah, well, I can imagine you going in there. So this thing was handwritten. The manuscripts you saw, and you turned in with those white gloves. It was handwritten, ancient manuscript. Beautifully written.
It was beautiful calligraphy. I mean, written in Anglo-Saxon. Beautiful calligraphy, and I mean, with some lovely human. Not that writing is not human, but with some touches that made me feel really close to the author of this manuscript, like little cartoons in the margin, and to indicate where some of the healing remedies began and where they ended. Where they began was a little finger pointing at the beginning of the healing spell, and at the end he'd drawn a little naked foot in the margin, and it just felt as if it had been written very recently, but yet the manuscript itself felt timeless. It's really ancient, beautiful vellum, beautiful, yeah.
And so you found the manuscript, but you decided to write The Way of Weird in the form of a novel rather than just a translation of the manuscript itself. What made you decide to do it that way rather than just as a translation?
Yeah, well, I thought of it at first as doing a translation, and but of course a lot of it, as I say, reads like fairly straightforward herbal medicine. So it was particular elements of it that I wanted to bring out, and so I had to go at doing that. First of all, that was the first way I was going to write it, but it just didn't feel that it was capturing what came across to me as a magical way of apprehending truth. It came across as an academic. I kept saying in footnotes, we're not sure the Anglo-Saxons did this, but we know the Greeks did that. And I thought, what, this is not coming alive. It's not actually working. So on one rainy Thursday morning, as I was walking on Western Road in Brighton, I thought, maybe I could write the thing as a story. And of course, there are traditions in all sorts of cultures of people writing up.
What do you think that something special is?
Oh, gosh. That's going to be very, very hard to put into words, but I'll try. I think it could be almost a sort of a national ether, a sort of a spiritual otherness that is all of us, a sort of a tribal identity.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think it's that little part that has been part of all of us for such a long time, but that the vast majority of people seem to have forgotten how to tap into or even recognize. But Because Arthur is all things to all people.
Yes, I was going to say that, because you can find Arthurian stories in Wales and Scotland and, in Glastonbury in England. And so he seems to be part of this entire place. And, of course, over in Brittany as well, you know. So, I mean, why do you think it's such a nationwide story? I won't use the myth or legend.
No.
I say story. Or
I think that's down to the fact behind the possible Arthur. Because if we look at the probability of a fact, he is an Eastern European whose family came over here probably 2nd century. He may have been a Sarmatian, which is sort of Bosnia-Herzegovina way. And basically they were the furthest east of the Roman legions. And if you had any sense, if Rome conquered you, you joined the army or the civil service because you got regular pay and a pension. His people were cavalry. They were horse warriors. And the Roman cavalry at the time was absolutely awful. They were all the sort of, the privileged sons of senators and whatever. They were playing at it. Whereas the legions were phenomenal. The cavalry was absolutely, I've shoveled better on my rhubarb. But all of a sudden here they inherit these wonderful cavalrymen. And according to what we think we know, they were sent up to the Antonine Wall and then back to Hadrian's. But they were forgotten about. And when Rome leaves under Constantine, you've got these people, so they say, well, hang on, we've got these up there, something. And by that time, they are probably 4th, 5th generation. They've come over with their wives, daughters, sons who have married local boys, local girls. And what nationality are you? But after the Roman withdrawal, and they opted to stay, they became a bit like mercenary troops, really. These war bands. And they were hired by the little kings, because Rome had made sure they didn't unite, because it's a lot easier to maintain control over little kingdoms. And he's up and down the whole border with the Saxons. I don't believe fighting actions to kick them out. I think fighting little actions to keep them busy, because we know at exactly that time Britain is withdrawing and it founds Brittany. There's an exodus, huge exodus, and they take everything they possibly can with them. And I think this is the Arthur. The Brittany side, they say, well, they believe it to be a man called Arthmael, who you can go to Saint-Amel in Brittany, and they've got what they think is his jawbone there. So you have this huge nationwide and the link into Brittany through that. And I believe that might be the factual side that gives us the spread. Of course, you do get so many people saying, oh, well, yes, this person was Arthur, but they're looking for the name Arthur, and of course that wasn't his name, it was a nickname.
Title, maybe.
Exactly, the Great Bear.
The Great Bear, yeah.
But they are calling children...
It became clear to me is when I was young, when I first met Ewan, when I was around 11 or 12, I actually met him earlier because he was a friend of the family, a friend of my father, and we came to the house a lot. But my first sort of, I was officially introduced to him, as it were, when I was 11. I became interested in spirituality around that time as well, sort of coincidentally. And I read a book called The Life of the Buddha by L. Adams Beck, which was a biography, if you like, of the Buddha, and it was incredibly inspiring. And that was that was when the light got switched on for me, as it were, and I began the spiritual quest. But at the same time, I was very interested in detectives. I mean, really Sherlock Holmes. I just loved the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Right.
And one of the great pleasures in doing this work on Ewan's life has been discovering the sort of the detective in me, if you like, which I'd forgotten, because I suppose that interest in detectives sort of waned after 4 or 5 years or whatever. And I'm not particularly interested in it even now. Stephanie likes a good detective story on the television, but it doesn't interest me particularly. But you see, when I knew Ewan, our relationship was of sort of teacher and pupil, in as much as he never talked to me about his life. I never talked about my life. He never asked me about my life. He taught me. So in other words, we began, as it were, by, I was very interested in photography, and he was a keen photographer as well. And so he invited me, he first invited me to help in a ceremony, holding a wicker structure over the lady in the autumn equinox ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
And it was actually so cold and rainy on that day. It's the only time I've ever actually watched my hands go blue, because I had to hold this thing, and there was another chap opposite who was holding the other side of it, and it started to rain, and the ceremony carried on, and our hands went blue, and it was just a real ordeal. So that was my sort of, an initiation into Druid work, I suppose, up on Parliament Hill in London. And what happened then was he asked me to photograph the ceremonies, and I started to do that, and I became intrigued by them. I started to help with the ceremonies, and then what happened is, sort of imperceptibly really, I'd come after school, I'd take the tube round from, I was at Westminster School, so it was St James's Park Underground Station. I'd go around on the District line to Barron's Court, and I'd get off, and I'd have my little sheets of contact photos. And I'd knock on the door, and he'd open it, and he'd say hello, and he'd say, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And he'd make me a cup of tea, and we'd sit in the basement room of his house, which he used to use for Grove ceremonies, for the Imolc meetings, for the Samhain meetings, ceremonies, and we'd have a cup of tea, and he'd go through the contact sheets, and he'd say, "Oh yes, I like that one. I'll have 5 copies of that, and 3 copies of that," and so on. And then we'd sort of slip into him talking about Druidry. And at some point, and I can't remember when it happened, the photography kind of fell away, and I started helping with the ceremonies and visiting him, and he was teaching me. Mm-hmm. And I asked to join the order, and he said I would have to wait until I was 18. And he asked for my birth details so he could have my horoscope cast, because in those days they always did your horoscope before letting you into the order. And then he said, you'll have to undergo, preparation before entering the order. And so I used to visit him probably once or twice a week during the term time. And again, he'd make me a cup of tea. And he would just read me text. In a way, he was doing what he did as his job, which was tutoring, at the place that which he ran, the tutoring establishment. And he would read the text out. He'd go to a cupboard in a sort of pantry between the kitchen and thing, and he'd unlock it, and there would be the piles of order teaching papers in sort of quarto duplicated sheets, and he'd take one down, and he'd sit there, and then he'd read it out, and make comments on the side, and then make little drawings and diagrams and notes and so on, which I'd take away. And then he'd ask me if I had any questions, and often I didn't. And he'd talk about the next festival and say, Imolc's coming up next week, could you help out with such and such or whatever. We'd make an arrangement for the next meeting, and then I'd leave. So when he died in 1975, I actually, strangely enough, didn't know much about him as a person. Right. And then when I decided to write his biography, there we were, when was it? It was in something like 2001, so we were talking about 25, 26 years later. And I didn't even know where to begin, really. And so I asked Ronald Hutton, I said, where do you think one should begin with exploring somebody's life? And he said, go to Probate House in London, where everybody's wills are kept. And, have a look at his will. That's a good starting point. And there was his 1941 will. And I started, and that was when the detective in me was sort of awoken, as it were. And it became absolutely fascinating, putting together the pieces of his life.
and tree. Your future like the earth is a balance very fine. So dance the mystic spiral and scatter mercies of time. So dance the mystic spiral and scatter mercies of time.
So, where to go next? My music has taken me all around the world over the years, and while I am there at these festivals, camps, conferences, I've had the opportunity to meet some incredible people from the history of Druidry, of witchcraft, of paganism. And the next 4 people are giants, I would say, our traditions. The first is from episode 64, which is an interview with Selena Fox. The next one is episode 65, where I got the chance to meet Margot Adler, author of Drawing Down the Moon. And then from episode 85, I interviewed Maxine Sanders, the High Priestess of Alexanders and co-founder of the Alexandrian tradition of Wicca. And finally, the great Starhawk on episode 114, author of The Spiral Dance, activist and founder of the Reclaiming tradition. So, let's get on.
Looking back, what was it that drew you to this path in the first place?
Well, from my earliest days as a young child, I have had mystical experiences in natural settings. Nature with the capital N.
Yeah.
I didn't have language at that time to say that I was pagan, but I look back now and I was doing nature mystic practices that opened the gateway to paganism as a spiritual path for me.
Yeah.
When I was in my teenage years, I began realizing that the fundamentalist Southern Baptist church in which I had been raised really wasn't being a good fit for me. I had this love of doing my spiritual practice outdoors, of doing ecstatic dance, I had a free spirit dimension to what I was doing, and that form of Christianity that was practiced in my church of origin was just too limiting. So I began some explorations at that time. But what really did it in terms of me really starting to call myself something was realizing from my studies of Greek and Roman mythology that I had a pantheist dimension to myself. And I had that growing as a concept in my late teens, and then when I was a senior at college, I had a transformative experience that clearly set me on the pagan path. I was a psychology major in college, but my love of classics continued on through my college years and to this day. As president of Eta Sigma Phi, the Classics Honor Society, and founder of the Classics Club on campus, which still exists, I thought in the spring of 1971 that we should not just talk about Greek and Roman culture and religion, we ought to experience it. So I led my very first public pagan rite of spring, public ritual of any type. And I had full cooperation of the whole faculty, graduate students, and some of the undergraduates. And we donned our togas and ivy leaf crowns on our heads. And I had a Therses symbol of Dionysus. And I had my tambourine. And we went out dancing and prancing and calling in the spring and called on Dionysus and all things Green Man. And we called on Mother Earth and all things Goddess of the Earth. And using the old names in ritual as a fun academic exercise opened the gateway. And from that point on, I became an activated pagan practitioner. Call the old ones, and then they showed up. So shortly after that, after I graduated college, it was just a few weeks after that, I got my very first job working on an archaeological dig.
Oh, right on. Okay.
Hampton, Virginia. It was an English tavern site that was being excavated. Yes, I met a woman who had survivals of old paganism in her family line. We worked in the archaeology lab together, and I realized the nature religion that had been my own creation, I thought, my own variation, actually other people were practicing something very similar.
Yeah.
And I began practicing with other people.
I worked with this, and I'm involved in witchcraft. And her eyes got big. And she said, have you ever thought of writing about it? I told her a little bit about the whole pagan movement and how this existed. And I said, quite frankly, no. The written word terrifies me. It's so eternal. The thing about radio is it goes in one ear and out the other, and people forget what it's all about. And she says, well, I've just left an agency and I'm starting out on my own. Call me in 2 weeks and I'll show you how to write a proposal. And I think at that moment I realized that if I had a book proposal, I would escape the limited aspect of my coven. And that I could encounter this broader pagan movement that I had seen in newsletters.
Sure.
But I was too scared to call her. But since she was at that one moment in her life when she had broken away from an agency and was starting on her own, she called me. And that's how I got my book contract.
Wow. So that's that, and that then
became a 3-year process. I went out and I opened up the Green Egg, which had 50 pages of letters. I looked for who all the interesting people were in the pagan movement, and I wrote them letters. And I had a very limited budget because the whole advance, I think, was $7,000, and I got half of it, whatever. But I locked myself first in the library and read all the books that I thought I should have read before embarking on a project like this, like The White Goddess and all this other stuff, Gate of Horn, all this stuff. And then I went around the country, and I just, I interviewed people all over the place, and that's how it happened.
Yeah. It's an incredible work, and one of the great things is it provides for me when I read it not a snapshot, but you know what I mean by this of how things were at that point, and then you did a revision a few years ago, and but some of the people in there were such an inspiration, but must have been all over the country. You can get the whole of Britain in Texas, I think, something like that, So us moving around, we don't have much of a problem. But
a lot of people were sort of upset at me because I went to California, interviewed all these fabulous people in California and Oregon. I interviewed people in Chicago and Philadelphia and Texas. And, by the time I came back to New York, I didn't interview almost anybody in New York. And so everybody said, you left out the East Coast. But maybe I didn't want to deal with the people I was working with closely as much.
Yeah. Was it no one's a prophet in their own town or something?
Exactly.
And
there's some amazing YouTube footage of you and Alex, and there's one. They all have very BBC narrators, and this rather demonic gentleman is a bank manager.
I know the one you're talking about, and he was.
He was. What, a demonic-looking man or a bank manager?
A bank manager.
So it seems like the decision that to take initiation threw you actually into a whirlwind of publicity that has obviously changed your life forever. You were handfasted to Alex in full view of the cameras, and I think that video is also available on YouTube.
It was a fake.
It was a fake?
We went through lots of them.
Oh, right. Okay. But there was obviously a non-fake one as well.
No, Alex would say, I'll show you something. And he'd always make it a little bit different for every film crew that came. So they felt they'd got an exclusive. But they did come from all over the world, so he wasn't in much danger. But yes, we did go through a hand fasting, and that was more precious to me and him at that time, than Kensington and Chelsea Registry Office several years later.
And how did you feel about that publicity? Because it was you were in the thick of it, weren't you?
Mortified, absolutely mortified. Alex was, I call him politely a magic man, but occasionally he was a real con man. And he told me he'd sit up all night at the Singer sewing machine, the treadle machine, making robes, white robes for the witches. Because he said that the covens he'd been involved with were a scruffy lot, and Alexandria, well, we weren't Alexandrians then, but our witches were going to be clean, purified, and wear beautiful robes, good robes. And so he'd sit up all night, and then we'd go to Alderley Edge, not because I didn't know that the press would be there, and I'd be stood there in the goddess position, and the invocation, and then these flashing lights would start, and I think, I'm having a really good spiritual experience here. Something's going to happen. And of course, the next couple of days, it came out in the Comet newspaper, witches working on Alderley Edge or something. And witches had worked on Alderley Edge for a long time. But it was a shock. It was a shock to me. Alex and Paul and most of the rest of the coven knew about it, but I didn't.
So for you, it wasn't anything about the publicity thing. For you, it was a spiritual path, a magical path.
Magical. I wanted to work magic. I liked the way witchcraft is and how it works. The fact that it's can be a heart magic, it can be high magic, and it can be a good old frolic in the woods. The art is knowing how to do each. So, no, publicity I was never very good at, and I was never very good at the media.
No. Did you have plenty of time where there weren't cameras there, or was
oh goodness, we worked very hard, and I hate that expression. Working very hard in the craft. You don't work hard in the craft. You love it, and that's why you're doing the work. And you're working because you want the experience. You want that extra something that makes you more alive. And I'm not talking about drugs. Wine occasionally helps. But no.
Just occasionally?
No. Just occasionally. I can't drink like I used to do, It's very annoying. No, I didn't like the media. And I really, really didn't like it. After Alex and I separated, there were a couple of things that I did, and I did it quite well. It was done in innocence and naivety. And then they invited me back, and I made a real cock-up of it. So I thought, no, I can't do any more of this. And so I tried to veer away from the public, the media side, because I don't enjoy it. And you can never trust them to do it correctly or write correctly or report correctly. And they've got to make it more exciting than it is.
Well, that kind of leads me on to this next question, because on the whole...
We didn't plan it.
No, it did. On the whole, the publicity seemed to be supportive, but then in '69, the News of the World... the News of the World, that doesn't exist anymore, funnily enough.
It worked eventually.
Yes. They turned on all of you, not just Alex and yourself.
No. It was a man called Ken.
Oh, okay.
And he came and he posed as a multimillionaire chicken farmer. And I knew there was something wrong with him when he couldn't answer the question, Why are chickens' eggs, when they're really orange in the middle, what does that mean? Well, for a chicken farmer, he didn't know, so he couldn't have been a chicken farmer. And I kept saying to Alex, there's something funny about that man. He doesn't know about chickens. And and I was right. And so he did this big expose. Of course, Alex loved it. He loved all of it. And, you know, even years later when he lived in Bexhill, and there was some press would have happened and they'd have said something nasty, and he'd ring me up and he'd say, "Oh, Maxine, do something, get onto the press council. You know, they've done an awful write-up on me and it's not true." And I'd be there worrying about it and getting in touch with people, and I'd ring back and I'd say, "Is Alex there?" And they'd say, "No, he's in the pub." He wasn't worried at all. He was just having a little drama. He loved it, good or bad. But then maybe it was at the right time for it to happen. It could have been anybody. It was just, I suppose, that Alex was a magic man.
And then we met some witches who said they practiced an American Celtic tradition and would begin training us and started talking about a religion of the goddess, which was a mind-blowing revelation to me, the idea that you can actually experience the divine in female form. And an old tradition that went back to the time before Christianity, before Judaism, where nature was sacred, where women were sacred and had a high value. Yeah. That was like amazing to me, and I just intuitively felt like, yes, this is it. This gives a name and a framework to what I have actually experienced in my life.
Right. Did you, if you were raised in a Jewish situation, did you let go of that aspect of seeing deity? Did you let that go to look more towards the goddess and deity in female form, or did you have any trouble with that kind of transition, or was it a natural transition?
It was a long transition, over a number of years, I think, because for a long time, in the early 70s, when I discovered the feminist movement, and there was started to be a big movement within the mainstream religions to make more roles for women's leadership, to open up to things like women rabbis, which had never been even conceived of when I was a child. For a long time, I wrestled with the question of whether I should become a rabbi or become a witch, remain a witch. And both really had their appeal. And then one day I sat down and I realized that if I became a rabbi, I would have to go to services all the time. And if I became a witch, I would be dancing around fires and jumping naked into the ocean.
Sounds a bit better.
So there you have it.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you went to UCLA and you received a BA in Fine Arts. Mm-hmm. Was it already on your radar that you wanted to be an author?
I think I had wanted to be an author as a child, and I had loved writing and telling stories. And then, again, as we got into the 60s, I also always enjoyed doing art and taking photographs. And when I went into college, I had kind of made the decision that I was going to only take classes I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. It was easier to do that in that era because when I went to UCLA, the university was free if you were a California resident. Now I tell that to young people and they can't believe it, they can't understand it, their jaws drop, right?
Yeah.
But in that era, we still believed that, higher education was something that society should provide for young people, and that it ultimately would be to the benefit of society to do that. So in retrospect, I had the advantage of a really incredible, rich education. I mean, I had art classes and art history classes, and I took a lot of dance classes, ethnic dance classes. We had a fantastic ethnomusicology department, so I was able to take Balinese and Javanese and African dance. I eventually took some actual academic courses, enough to actually get a degree. But in many ways, I feel like I learned more from the arts and more from the dance. I mean, it's a tremendous way to learn about another culture.
Yes.
To actually experience their dance forms and their rhythm and their music. I think much more powerful, actually, than just learning a lot of facts about them from a book.
Yeah. You become absorbed into the culture by experience, don't you? That's the thing, I guess, yeah.
Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. The earth spins in a midnight sky and the nighttime follows the day. She spins in a wheel around the sun and together they hug and say, round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. The moon moves through the star-filled skies from dark to crescent to full. 13 times in the cycle of the sun to grant your every boon. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. The oak tree blooms, then gives forth leaves, a greeting to the sun. Seeds ripen with the turning leaves and fall down to the ground. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. The sun moves past the ancient signs, calling in the 12 to be. The stars mark his fiery path and the ages come to be. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Wheels in wheels forever spin, the great dance ever to be. Round and around the music goes, unending harmony. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes. Round and around it goes, oh, round and around it goes.
One of the great privileges I have of being the host of DruidCast is over the years I've managed to interview some of my favourite musicians, and they are the subject of the next series of clips. Episode 26, we have Robin Williamson, founder of the incredible string band and wonderful bard. We have episode 35, Simon Emerson, founder of the Afrocelt sound system, Imagined Village, music producer and honorary bard of the order, as is Robin Williamson. And that takes us into Einar Selvik, who is the founder of Wardruna, from episode 166. So let's have some music talk.
Yeah, I used to watch people like Bert Jansch, who I used to know very, very well. And we used to often share lodgings and so on back in the early days, the early 60s. And he'd get up in the morning and he'd have a cup of tea, and he'd be holding a guitar while he was drinking the tea. And he'd be playing the guitar in between the sips of tea, and by the end of the day, he'd still be playing the guitar, you know? He played, every time his hands weren't occupied with anything else, he'd be trying things on the guitar. He was absolutely driven.
Yeah. And so you left school at 15, and according to some, you went straight into becoming a professional musician straight away. Was that really how it was, or was it not quite as simple?
That really is how it was, although how professional it really was. We didn't have much work, you know.
All right.
It was more like living in the dilapidated squat-like buildings
Right.
and just trying to get by somehow. And me and Bert got a job picking potatoes in one of the fields in Lothian, East Lothian, and got a bus to London on the strength of one gig I had, which was in the Troubadour in 1961, and then that was the only gig I had that winter. So I ended up giving up on hitching back to Scotland, and then me and Clive and Bert started a folk club in Scotland in the early 60s, and that was how that was when the sort of professional bit of it started coming in.
Right, okay. And so when you formed the Incredible String Band, how long was it before you kind of got that first recording contract and things started to roll for you?
Well, we were playing every Saturday night in this kind of in this abandoned apartment store on Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. It would start at midnight on Saturday night and play till 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. And after about a year of those gigs, Joe Boyd came up to looking to try and get us a deal with Elektra. But unfortunately, the night he came, the police had closed the club down. So luckily, he wasn't deterred, and he came back, and we signed to Elektra in 1965.
And then did you have your first 3 albums? I think it was 5,000 Spirits, Hangman's Beautiful Daughter, and Wee Tam. Is that right?
Yeah.
And the
first one was called The Incredible String Band. The next one was called The 5,000 Spirits and Layers the Onion, and the third one was called Hangman's Beautiful Daughter.
Right, and that kind of laid the groundwork. And you appeared at Woodstock, I believe, yeah.
Yes, we're one of the only, but I think about the only Scottish band to do it, and one of the very few English bands.
I mean, what an amazing... I didn't know that, actually, Robin. I didn't know you were there. I mean, if you've got any kind of memories of Woodstock you could share with us.
Yeah, well, 1 or 2 memories. A long time ago now, you know. What I remember vividly, we were told that it was going to be a small upstate folk festival.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, it seemed to be a bit bigger than that when we realised we couldn't get in. There was no way to drive into it. We ended up going in a helicopter with Ravi Shankar and John Sebastian.
Oh, man.
And it was a military plane, and it banked over the side, over the site, and you could see out of the open side of the helicopter, and all you could see were little coloured dots all the way to the horizon, and that was people's heads.
Oh,
and that was, I realised, you know, what a huge thing it was. You know, it was the biggest festival I'd ever seen at the time.
Yeah,
it was a pivotal moment. It was sort of a pivotal moment in time. That, looking back on it, you can see that. I mean, everyone there had a sort of feeling that this was an epoch-making crossroads of a time. And I mean, I personally at that time believed that money was going to become extinct and that war would become obsolete. And you know, it was a tremendous feeling of optimism.
Yeah.
And oddly, and when it didn't happen, a lot of people were very disappointed. You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, history seems to consist of, you know, one step forward, one step back. You know.
Yeah, there's always those moments.
Hopefully 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That would be better.
That would be better. That would be better. And in that year, you were the Incredible String Band was the 4th best-selling recording artist, other than the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Cream. Is that right?
There's a quote about that. Yeah, between the certain number of years, 65 and 71, I think we had more albums in the top 5.
Yeah.
Than we had. The only other bands that had any more albums was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, the Cream, and the Who. So we had a lot of records in the top 5.
There was another band called the Mekons.
Oh, yeah, I remember the Mekons, yeah.
who were very much into their folk music. And in fact, Joe Strummer, just before he died, I met him at Glastonbury, and he was one of the people who took me aside, because I kind of, when we were doing the Africult record at Real World, he was in the studio opposite. So we kind of got to hang out together.
Right.
And he was one of the people that took me aside and said, look, you know, I should stop doing so much Celtic music and start doing the music of my own ancestry. look under the, you know, look at the ground under my feet and do some English stuff. No, I mean, the spirit is very much there, yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. And, I mean, you're looking at your sort of musical career so far, from the kind of punk through to, you know, I remember Stone Grove, and then the Africelts, and now the Imagine Village, and also you've got your production side with the album Show of Hands and things I've seen you do. I mean, what events in your life have influenced your kind of music? I mean, is there a particular memory that made you?
Well, I guess big events. one of the first moments where I really kind of felt the power of music was when I was a kid, and I went to see the Ipcress File with Michael Caine, and it's one of these kind of fantastic English gangster films. And the music by John Barry completely captivated me. And I remember just thinking Michael Caine was this incredibly cool kind of East End geezer. And there's a shot in it where he makes his omelette, and it's a kind of seduction scene, but he's cooking, and he's kind of chatting up this woman making an omelette. And I just remember thinking, this bloke is so cool. You know, he was the kind of archetypical, I don't know what you call him now, some stupid term like a metrosexual male or something, but he was just really cool, really smart, and he could cook, and it had this fantastic soundtrack. And I got kind of obsessed with film music, which I still am. But the biggest impact, I think, really was my dad used to manage a psychedelic blues band. And I think I was about 12 or 13, and he took me to the Roundhouse, and they used to have a club there called Middle Earth, which I think was run by Billy Bragg's manager, Pete Jenner. He was certainly involved. And on the bill, there was Captain Beefheart and his magic band. And I remember sitting in the audience, and one of the band members had this kind of, had a Hoover draped around him, you know, and I just remember listening to his music and thinking, this is the most amazing music I've ever heard. And I've become a sort of Beefheart fan ever since. And then I guess going to go to see the early Clash gigs. I used to follow them around.
Yeah.
They were a fantastic band.
Didn't you spend some time in Africa as well?
Well, I was kind of going to come on to that.
Okay.
I spent the 80s hanging out in jazz clubs.
Yeah.
I'm massively into jazz and soul music. So I was very lucky in the 80s. You know, I had a Musicians Union card and used to be able to go to Ronnie Scott's from Monday to Thursday. I think it's just for a couple of quid. So I got to see all the jazz greats, but I think it was in '92, I ended up in Senegal working with Baba Mal,
right.
Doing an album called Lam Toro, and then I went back to do Firing in Futa, and I guess that was a huge turning point in my life, because at that point I was very close to sort of leaving the music industry because I didn't really have any work, and it was a fantastic experience, and something very close to anyone who's kind of taken the bardic, path, because of course, you know, in West Africa you have a living, breathing bardic tradition represented by the griots.
Sure.
And I mean, that's really what got me into it, because I when I came back, I was searching around for a kind of a Western and a European approach to this amazing music that Baba Mal was playing, and I kind of stumbled across the bardic tradition, partly actually through working with Davy Splann, the Irish piper and uilleann pipes player. I'd asked him over to England. He was living in the Burren at the time, and I'd asked him over to work on this music that I'd recorded in Senegal, which had kind of completely blown my mind, and all I could hear in it was this, what sounded to me like this kind of very deep ancient Celtic air. And he came over and he recognised the melody that Baba Mal was singing as one of his own, and got his low whistle out and started joining in.
Wow.
And I couldn't, I just kind of said, look, I don't know where to start, what's going on here. And he said, oh, well, the Aboriginal Irish, the original Irish, the Furbolg were very dark-skinned, and there were these, trade links between North Africa and Ireland and up the west coast of Europe, and down, from Brittany down to Galicia. And he just kind of put me on that whole path. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what finally led you to discovering the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, I guess. And,
I mean, that was very much part of it. I actually wrote Philip Cargom a letter and sent him this track and said, can you help me out
Oh, right. Okay.
I've stumbled across this kind of music, and I don't really know what to do. And I mean, I was out there for quite a long time, and we went into Mali. We were taken to Gambia. We found these stone circles in the middle of Gambia, which I'm sure have probably been researched, but I still haven't found any kind of particularly detailed academic stuff on their sort of their lineage. But anyway, so Philip wrote me a very nice letter back, and we just kept up a correspondence, and that was back in 91, 92.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is go back to the beginning, if you would. What inspired you to form Wardruna?
Well, I guess it's a number of things. One of them being that I don't know, since my teenage years, I sort of had this vision, basically born out of the lack of there being music like this. I could hear it, I could see it, and I really wanted to have some music where you would interpret these Old Norse themes and traditions on their own premises, rather than just borrowing bits and pieces here and there, relevant instrumentation, sounds, language, etc. Like full on the full circle in a way, not necessarily trying to copy or try to recreate music from a specific time period, much more broader. So I guess at some point, that feeling or need to hear and to do something like this just became stronger and stronger. So at some point in the early 2000s, it was just I just had to do it. I don't know, it might be a cliche, but I can't. It's the sort of thing where I couldn't not do it in a way. So started working with it, and eventually I just quit everything else for a long period and just focused on this, doing something that came from the heart in a way.
As one musician to another, have you had formal musical training?
No, I am kind of a musical illiterate in a way. I play by the ear and intuition. I can't read notes and those kind of things. But I have been working with music since I was a child. I was obsessed with drums when I was like 2-3 years, and I got my first. I had musicians in my family as well, so I was able to get my hands on a drum kit at a very young age. I think I was 7 or 8, and quickly understood that I didn't like to play other people's music, and so that drove me into wanting to learn other instruments as well. So I could make music that I could play drums to, basically. So, I guess that creative drive has always been there, more so than the performative drive, I would say.
Right. I'm the same. I can't read a note. And I sometimes think that's almost a benefit, because if you don't know the rules, you don't know you're breaking them.
Exactly. I also look upon it as more so a blessing than an obstacle. Of course, sometimes when you work with people, there are some practical practical issues, but in a way they are perfectly overcomable. So
your entry was through the drums. weirdly enough, again, so was mine in a way. I was taught Irish folk guitar, but in my teens and 20s, I was a drummer in a heavy metal band. And I think you were the same.
Indeed.
And at some point, both of us sort of found our home in acoustic music almost. And so what was the journey from kind of like a metal drummer to an acoustic musician with, you know, how did that kind of transition occur?
Well, I grew up with older siblings listening to metal music, but there was also a lot of classical music in my house, and also I've since a very young age had a sort of been drawn to historical music and also to traditional Nordic music predominantly, also Sami music. So I don't know. It's sort of been there all along. I've been inspired by it in my work with metal music as well. There is a lot of influence from traditional as well as classical in terms of tonality and patterns and so on. So I guess, like I said before, this in my teens, I don't know, these things started to change, and this need to do something more in line with my roots became stronger and stronger. I guess in the time where I played in Gorgoroth and these other metal bands, I was really done with the whole metal thing, even a few years before that. So it was more a work thing, an artistic expression in a way, but nothing personal. I was in a different place, and I at the heart, I wanted to do something else. Thankfully, I had the guts to do that.
Yeah. As a podcaster, I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. And one of the podcasts I listen to regularly is a podcast called Folk on Foot, where the host goes for a walk in the countryside with a folk musician and they talk as they walk. And I thought it was a wonderful format. So I took inspiration from that, as they say in the trade. So I'm going to play a few clips from those Walking the Talk episodes now, because I love doing that. And I will definitely be doing more of those in the coming months. The first one is from episode 163, which is Christopher Hughes as we walk around Anglesey. Adrian Rook took me for a walk in episode 168 to the Stanton Drew Stone Circle, then a walk around Balcombe with Heidi McNee in episode 172, and then finally a walk around a sacred place near Eastbourne with Gary Colcombe in episode 176. So get your walking boots on and let's go for a few walks.
So she inspires us to be poetic and creative. She inspires us to analyse our own inner sovereignty and what that means. She floods quite dramatically in February to cover the entire path that we've walked down, which looks quite remarkable from when you consider how deep she is. So I have a vial of homemade, I think it's hawthorn wine, this one in particular. So we stop here and acknowledge that braint ydy ein diwyes o barddoniaeth a sofraniaeth, a da ni'n ddiolchgar I ti am dy anrhegion a dy fendithion, that to braint we give thee thanks for fertile soil, for abundance. Braint, goddess of this river, accept this offering. Know that we honour you. Know that we love you. Braint, bendition arna ti.
Blessings.
And it's nice that even in a procession of 300 people, you see this Druid transmitted infection that occurs because this bridge is really narrow.
Yes.
You can't get an awful lot of people here. So whoever's at the head of the processional queue, if you like, will stop here, and you see this infection of giving offerings spread down to the very end.
Yeah.
You know, who can't even see what's occurring on the bridge, and yet they're compelled to be prompted by it, and inspired by it.
Yes,
you know,
it's very moving. Very moving. Oh, and a narrow path again. When did you first come here?
Well, believe it or not, and I mean for your listeners, I just described about half a mile across the fields is a garage.
Right.
And my uncle used to own that garage.
Oh, right. Okay.
So when we visited my uncle on a Sunday afternoon, the family, my mum, dad and siblings would all have tea and buns, and I'd escape across to the Stones.
Come over here.
So I've been coming over here since I was, a wee boy, so to speak.
So what attracts a wee boy to come to a stone circle? You know, you must have had an interest in this stuff even back then.
I think your listeners would understand, not everybody would, but this place is in my blood. And, whether or not I've had some past life experience, but I've always felt the moment I step into this wonderful temple, something magical occurs within me. And it changes my DNA, and I just feel I've had experiences here which are almost indescribable. So
this used to be very much enclosed. This was all wooded, and then when they came to do the reservoir, they dug it out, and as you know, it's a horseshoe shape. So this is the beginning of the Balcombe end.
Right.
Balcombe folk call it the Balcombe Reservoir. Yeah. Ardingly folk call it the Ardingly Reservoir, and there's always been much competition between Balcombe and Ardingly at the best of times. So you can imagine 1970, whatever it was, they started to do this. It is a beautiful, beautiful area. Because I know that you said you've played along as a child along the reservoir.
I have played along here when I was a kid myself, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but I don't know how far down this end you ever got, whether you just stayed in it.
Not at all.
Ardingly.
I actually believe I was playing beside the Ardingly Reservoir, not the Balcombe Reservoir.
Were you really?
Yes, at the time.
Better. As you can see, this one's much prettier.
I've got to say, it's pretty, and it is absolutely heaving with fish. Look at the shoal of spry. There's absolutely hundreds of fish, and it is beautifully surrounded by
country as well. So if you're really lucky, we may see a kingfisher going from that willow there that's dripping into the water. So that's a white willow, not a weeping willow. So that's where they've been seen before.
So we're still on the mound and by the tree, and we're under this holm oak, and I was just thinking that people can live lifetimes and not see things like that, but those things that have fallen into your presence, and do you think that may have happened because of your involvement with the spiritual stuff when you were growing up? Because did it maybe open up certain parts of you that other people find harder to learn how to open, I guess?
Dave, I don't know. I can't answer it for other people, really. I don't know. But for myself, I think I can say that I grew up with a large degree of acceptance of many things that normally you might have shut by and said, it's a reflection in the sunlight or whatever. But I accepted these things as existing and accepted these things as happening. So, acceptance.
And you do have a very, I think, deep and personal relationship with the other world, with the realm of the fairy or of the she.
Yeah, I do.
That was that the first time you'd seen a kind of a manifestation of that kind of nature?
Yes, it was.
And do you think that is why that thread has continued to this day with your connection with those things?
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to show you the second encounter of space I had.
Oh, okay.
If it's still here.
Yeah. And so what do you after so many years of feeling that connection with what I would see as the other world, and I never mean that as another world.
Sure.
I always think that, you know, all you need to do is just step slightly to one side and you'll be there. You just need to know how to step slightly to one side to see it. It's all here. It's just our eyes can't always perceive it.
Absolutely.
What is that your kind of understanding of that?
Definitely.
Of their worlds, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think there are places you can go that make it easier. I think there are things you can do that make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Ritual, for example, in the right place and at the right time helps that. They used to say the veil becomes thin.
Yes.
Which is an expression I very much go for.
Yeah.
I believe in that one.
Yeah.
So.
Right. One of the great things about DruidCast, I think, is that it provides an audio history of the modern Druid tradition. Not just the modern Druid tradition, but we've never shied away from having many, many different traditions on our show. So you'll find people talking about the Norse tradition, you'll find Anglo-Saxon interviews and presentations, you'll find talks from Wicca, from witchcraft, all different types of people on the path, because we think that wisdom comes from many places. And of course, some of the people who have been interviewed, some of the people who have given presentations on DruidCast have crossed the veil. They are no longer with us, yet their voices can still be heard on DruidCast. And I think that is a very, very valuable, beautiful contribution to the modern Druid movement. And one of the other things that DruidCast does is it marks moments in time. And so the next couple of audio clips you will hear are from the handing over of the role of Chosen Chief from Philip Cargom to our current Chosen Chief, Irma Burke. The first is an interview between Irma and Philip where they talk about the changeover, and that's followed by a clip from a talk given by Professor Ronald Hutton at what was going to be the 2020 special summer gathering that had to be put off for reasons that we all know, but finally happened a couple of years ago, where he talks about the trend that did happen with Druid groups when they changed leadership before, but somehow Obod had managed to put behind us. So here is Philip and Irma, and that is followed by Professor Ronald Hutton.
So maybe you can say a little bit about what Obod means to you.
Well, I joined Obod in 2003, and I didn't get involved in any of the activities because I was in Ireland, and then I did 2 of the weekends, the ritual and meditation for Druids, and that was with Kate and Barry Riley. Really, really enjoyed those. And still, I didn't go to any of the camps because they clashed with my own ceremonies that I was holding at home. So in 2011, I went to my first summer gathering, and I've been going ever since. And for me, Obod has been very much a second home. And it's really interesting for me because I'm Irish, and I was brought up, in history, about how awful the English were to the Irish people. And I've come to experience a deeper rooted connectedness with Ireland through my connection with Obod here. And so, I mean, I go to both. I go 4 times a year. I come to the UK.
You come to each of the Glastonbury gatherings?
Each of the gatherings. And then I go to the Druid Gorset. I suppose I've been to 4. I went to the first Ovate Gorset in 2010. I think that was the first Ovate Gorset. And then the next time I was on the Druid grade. And then I've been going on the Obod retreats. And
what's your experience? Why do you keep coming back? I mean, what?
Well, it feeds me. It's like a second family. And I mean, there's a range of people that I would never have met otherwise. And also my other Druid colleagues will say, these are my people, this is my tribe, this is my home. And that really, really resonates with me. I really like the people. I love the ceremonies. I get quite high on them. I love the way Obod is... I suppose there's nothing wrong with Obod. I don't see anything, as if taking over this role as CC, that anything needs fixing. So for me, it has worked very, very well. I have felt I belong. I haven't been aware of a hierarchy. I haven't been controlled. I've been free to explore my own spiritual path. I have found friends. The gatherings are always well organised. They're very, very well held. and the responsibility is shared out among so many people, and that I really, really like. So I'm coming in, taking over something that's working very, very well, which actually is a lovely situation to get into, because I mean, many people who take over organisations, often they have to clean them up or transform them.
Fix them in some way.
Fix them, exactly.
Yes.
And for me, what I've liked around, this is my perception of your holding of it, is that you're rather permissive, a kind of a stand back approach, which I think works very, very, very well, because there are so many competent people who hold the space with you. And it's always struck me that if an outsider came on the tour to look at a ceremony, nobody'd know who the chosen chief was. And that is something I value about Obod. And I hope perhaps that I will be able to continue that, because I tend to be permissive in terms of my managing of things. Obviously, if there's a crisis or something, I will kick in. But it's lovely to know that there's a cohort of people who support me in my role, and that people do their job so well. So it's been actually a family that works very well. Not all families are functioning, are functional, but I feel I'm nourished here, and that's very, very important. I mean, I come 4 times a year, which is a lot to travel, and it's been really, really important. So I feel I belong here in some ways, and yet my home is in Ireland.
Yeah.
I'm not moving here.
Yes,
but this is like very much a second home.
That's lovely. That's lovely, and I think you're right. This idea of permissive, in the sense of empowering others. I think one of the sort of guiding principles has always been, for me, has been that it's about empowering other people. It's not about lording it over them, but empowering them. And as you say, always being ready to step in if needed, but most of the time, the trick is the opposite, which is to step back. And I think I learnt that, of course, that's a huge thing in psychotherapy. As a therapist, you learn how to hold the space, which is sounds terribly vague, doesn't it? But it's actually really a meaningful thing. Like taking responsibility, being fully present, fully there, but also allowing...
And nobody knowing you're doing it.
Nobody knowing you're doing it. It's not a big deal from other people's point of view. And yet, if necessary, you're there. You're fully present, and you're there. And that's hugely important, and it's lovely, and it's lovely that you absolutely get that, and you want to continue in that way. It's something that a teacher. I think when I trained in Montessori education as well. That's one of the principles in Montessori education, is that you empower the children by getting out of their way, but always being there in the event of need, and so on.
And I suppose another thing I value about Obod is, okay, we have our 3 grades. Nobody ever asks anyone, what grade are you on? It doesn't come up in conversation. Okay, you might know if you're going to the Grove meetings who's who, but so it's not important. And yet, regardless of what grade you are, you have roles to play and roles of responsibility or gifts to offer the order, which I just absolutely love and value. So there isn't that sense of hierarchy, which is something I think is one of the strengths of Obod.
There was somebody, I've forgotten who said it, but something said one of the points of having power is to be able to give it away. And
Absolutely.
I think that's exactly the role of the chief, is not to hang on to the power, but actually to give it away.
Now we come to this extraordinary turn of events, the completely unprecedented and, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, shocking spectacle of a peaceful transference. Just think of the 11 decades of crowded history that we are betraying in this moment. According to everything for which we've stood in the past, according to our entire record, Philip should be dead. And it's now too late for him to do so. Emma should then have declared herself chief, followed shortly afterwards by Dave the Bard from his Hollywood, establishing a rival group. And then the eldest daughter of Philip and Stephanie will count up to 2,000 and then proclaim herself the true chief. And we can then go back to our happy traditions, having rival groups trying to hog the limelight at Stonehenge for decades, but we haven't done it that way. As part of the magic that is Obod, here we all are together. We've turned our back on the past, and frankly, since I spend so much time there, I recommend to you that the best thing one can do with the past is to turn one's back on about 98% of it. But we are making the future, and we're making it wonderfully. It could be that what's just happened is that Druidry has matured at last. It could be we even got sensible. But then I look at Adrian and... and my other beloved and esteemed colleagues and friends on this podium with me, and say, maybe we haven't done it yet. Maybe we've even got the best of both worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, our chosen chiefs.
This is Hex Nottingham at the Mystic Moon Community Center of Norfolk, Virginia. 8 years ago, I cheered you on to 100 more episodes, and you did it, my friend. Episode 200. Congratulations and blessed be.
Congratulations and blessed be.
Thank you, Hex, and thank you to everyone who wrote to tell me how much DruidCast has meant to you over the years. I hope you've enjoyed this little odyssey, and here is to many more episodes to come. During the show, you heard The Mabon, Round and Around, and The Mystic Spiral from Silver on the Tree from their remastered double album, and you'll find a link to download it in the show notes. But this music means we are approaching the end of the show, but before I go, let's have the results of last month's competition. The prize was a copy of the Handbook of Contemporary Animism, which was edited and created by Graham Harvey, and the question I asked was, during the questions at the end of his talk, Graham talked about a particular species of ape that did a dance of awe. What is the species of ape? Well, the answer is chimpanzee, and the first name drawn from the hat and winner of that amazing book is Ruth Corbett from Georgia, USA. Congratulations, Ruth. That book will be with you very soon. We have another wonderful prize this month. It's a handcrafted sterling silver Arwen pendant, an ovate gift to the order and to whoever is lucky enough to win it, and it was donated by Brian Platt. Thank you so much, Brian. It is beautiful and perfect for a prize for the 200th show. So, what do you need to do to have a chance of winning that beautiful pendant? The answer is simple. Answer this question. During the show, you heard an interview with the musician and bard Robin Williamson, who was in a band that played at Woodstock back in the 60s. What was the name of that band? During the show, you heard an interview with the musician and bard Robin Williamson, who was in a band that played at Woodstock back in the 60s. What was the name of that band? Email your answer along with your full postal address to podcast@druidry.org, and one of you will win that gorgeous pendant. Well, that is the end of 200 episodes of DruidCast. I will see you again next month for DruidCast episode 201. But until then, I wish you all, as ever, peace and blessed be. Goodbye.